Hey everyone, it's Ryan Dash here with the Vancouver Life Real Estate Group, and welcome back to this week's podcast. This is an interesting podcast. We have Keaton Bessy from Greater Vancouver Tenant and Property Management joining us today, and we are going to cover a rental market update here. It's actually been 8 months since Keaton was last on our podcast, and a lot has changed both in the real estate market, but also in the rental market as well since that time. And last time we spoke, Keaton, rental rates were inching higher and higher every single month, and there was no sign of this thing slowing down. It was like a runaway freight train. But with a recent surge in inventory, elevated rates, the banning of Airbnb, in secondary properties, and some very recent changes to the residential tenancy laws, the landscape since we last spoke has changed dramatically. What's more, we're going to take a look at a recent ruling by the residential tenancy branch that authorized a 23.5% increase in rent for a landlord here in Vancouver. Keaton has been tracking that story, and we're going to dive into that one, as well as we're going to unpack just about everything we can in terms of what's happening in the space. Can we help tenants and can we help some landlords here? Keaton, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. Glad to be here. Less hair this week, but we'll see Dan next week, I guess.
So, Keaton, I'm gonna provide a bit of a rental market update here, just in terms of what we've been reading and what we're seeing statistically speaking, and then I'd love to hear from you whether or not this is correlating with what you're finding in the marketplace. So, asking rents for all residential property types in Canada increased 5.9% year over year, with an average of $2,201 as of July. If you can believe it, this represents the slowest annual rate of growth over the previous 31 months. Asking rents for apartments in Vancouver continued to trend upward for the third straight month, up 1.9% month over month, but remained down 7.2% in July, with an average of $3,101. It's $3,101. In Toronto, the average purpose-built and condominium rents increased a mere 0.2%. And remained down 4.6% annually in July at an average rent of $2,719. July saw an average rents for 5 out of the 6 Canada's largest markets here, with an average monthly change of almost 1%. So at this point, Vancouver still sits atop as the most expensive rental market in all of Canada. So for reference here, the average one-bedroom condo, while down 8.4% year over year, is now $2,761 a month, and a two-bedroom down 6.4% year over year to $3,666. So while this is still very high for the average person, interestingly, though, it's only BC and Ontario that saw rents soften while the rest of Canada continued to increase. So, Keaton, let's take some of that with grains of salt, because I'm sure what we're reading and what you're seeing are two different things. So I'd love for you to maybe touch on some of those points. Maybe talk to us about what you're seeing.
Yeah. The rentals.ca stuff, which I've said multiple times before, and same, there's a Zumper report and a Live Rent report that a lot of people reference, and these are all asking rents. If the rental market was very boring, asking rents are actual rents. Like, there's not a lot of variation there, but with how crazy the market has been last year, just how much demand there was for like pressure on rents going upwards, and now how complicated the market is now with all the changes that we'll get into. This more and more I look at these reports, it's more of like a landlord sentiment index than actual what's going on the ground. We're seeing rents up until about 2 months ago, we were kind of at a level of like April 2023. So like last year just went, and then the last quarter just kind of cut everything off. And then January flat, and it's been a really boring, very predictable year as far as rents go. Like when we say it's going to rent for this, it rents for that, and it's just very easy to kind of manage. The last month or two, we've definitely seen some softening, like in areas that we don't even think about what the rent is going to be because we rent that product so often. Like a 1 bedroom in downtown or a 1 bedroom in like North Burnaby or something. Like we fire that stuff out of a gun. It's just all the time done, done, done. And we're now not like, we'll go through our marketing meetings and think like, wait, why is this still here? What is going on with this? Like why, like is our ad broken? Is there some missing communication that we just haven't grabbed onto? And it's like, no, everything's working great except for the market, except for our expectations. So definite softening recently. These numbers are also going to be based so year on year. So people may remember last year, Daily Hive had this viral article talking about the average 1 bedroom condo is $3,000 a month in downtown Vancouver. It wasn't. However, landlords have been just seeing like screaming high and really, really big pressure on rents going up. And so that was just now the de facto 1 bedroom rent in Vancouver, and that was their expectations. So again, this is asking rent, then put into rentals.ca versus asking rent now. Heading into August, which is supposed to be the busiest time of year for rentals, we've had a lot of calls in July putting properties on the market in August with owners being like, well, it's the busiest time of the year. You're like, yeah, it's supposed to be. The summer's been a little bit slower, but we'll expect some pressure leading up to Labor Day, which is usual, and then it'll kind of slow down from there. Okay, so we're trying a little bit higher right now, and it's not working out at all. It's actually, we're seeing like it's getting slower as August goes versus July, right? So market's a little bit weird right now.
That's pretty interesting because for what it's worth, in the sales market, if you overlist right now, no one's calling you either, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very much a marketplace where things are priced to market. And if you're not priced to market, if you're, 3-4% over the market value or the market range for that property, you're just not getting calls and you're just not getting showings done. So it's interesting to hear that. And if I go back to where we were, 8 months ago, I remember, I think, you were putting out rental applications or you're putting out, properties for rent, and you were getting like 100 applications in an hour. It's incredible to see.
A lot.
Yeah, it's incredible to see how that shift in dynamic has taken place. Much as I alluded to at the start, there's been a lot of change. So maybe it's not a big surprise that we've seen this. What was a bit of a surprise is maybe the amount of and surge of listings we've had. And I think, part of that is policy driven. I think some of that is also, it's largely policy driven when you're talking about banning secondary Airbnbs, when you're talking about changing the amount of time that notice periods for tenants and things like that. I think there's a large misconception that because there's now more property on the marketplace, there's going to be more available rentals for people. But that's presumably not the case. In fact, I would argue that a larger amount of listings on the marketplace is actually pulling back rental inventory at this point. Is that also something that you would tend to agree with?
Definitely. I think just the average consumer thinks that, I can try to rent and I can try to sell at the same time. And like no real estate professional with any sort of confidence or pride in their own profession is going to let somebody else list their property at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense. So we only rent properties that are not listed for sale, and I would assume you would do the same thing, vice versa.
Yeah, largely,
it gets in the way, right? So they're off market one way or the other. I feel like there's just generally a lot of noise. Like there's a lot of reasons for people to either do something or not do something right now. And there's a lot of like little anecdotal things that have popped up where I'm like, oh, this is happening now, and like this is happening. So like we've got a couple people reach out and say that they've got laid off from their like high paying job, and now they're looking across the country or into the States or whatever, and they seem like quite concerned about this. And like, I am interviewing, it should be fine, but I likely have to move, and we're calling you to rent our place out. It's okay. Like, did you ever want to be a landlord? Well, no. Do you just live in it to like have an income? Yeah. Okay. So sell it. Oh, I'm not selling my Vancouver property. Like, but wait, why? Like you just live in it, and if you go live somewhere else, you're going to rent, and then like, but this is, people are doing this. There's so many additional complications, and then the short-term rental bans, and then the interest rates coming back down, and people trying to refinance and maybe sell or upgrade, and then there's investors not wanting to be in the market, and then there's a bunch that still are looking around because there could be some deals coming up, and there's so many pieces moving around now that's like I have no idea. I had a thesis last year, but this year I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think there's a lot of people try and put their finger on what's taking place and try and pin it to one particular thing, when often cases it's just not true. It's a multitude of factors here. So I guess then I just one last kind of follow up to the rental market update. Then are you seeing maybe a slowdown in the rental market more as a result of policy decisions or the macro environment, or would it be arguably both?
We have more listings than we've had. I think we're at our all-time high of like listings in our marketing dashboard. So stuff that's on the market right now and stuff that's coming on very shortly. We've historically grown our business consistently since we started 6 years ago. So whether that's a factor of that or whether that's just a factor of more people trying to rent their properties out because they have to, or they can't sell, which is a conversation that's coming up a lot, which is BS, because if you put it on the market for $100,000, it's gone, right? Well, that's not what I mean. Okay, well, you got to find your price, right? And they don't like that price, so they're going to do the rental thing. I've had, aside from realtors and like reporters and stuff asking about the short-term rental stuff, it's literally as if it doesn't exist. Like it's just never happened. Or if you try to go to Kelowna for, vacation or something, there's no Airbnb, right? So it's tough, but I just haven't heard much about it.
I was actually up in Kelowna a couple of weeks ago, and the amount of Airbnb options now, they're just gone. There's just nothing. You're looking at resorts, you're looking at, unless it's someone's home, right? That's really the only options there, and it's incredibly expensive for what is available as well. Which anyhow, I wanted to touch on also speaking to long-term rents versus short-term rental rates here. And it's a bit more of a complicated question because I want to tack in immigration here. It's a bit of a hot topic, and I'll just go over some of the numbers again. We mentioned it in our last podcast. I'll revisit them here because, Q2 saw record growth again, totaling 1.2 million people year over year. That's a massive change. And non-PRs are the vast majority of this population growth, coming in at 810,000 year over year. And I think this is important because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but presumably this is one of the largest sectors applying upward rental price pressure on current inventory. But with that being said, we're going to start to see, we're told we're going to start to see immigration levels come down, though it hasn't really happened yet. And I don't know how much it's going to, because in order to maintain positive GDP growth, we have to have this turnover. We have to have, we need immigration. So maybe let's talk a little bit about what you think is coming here in the short term versus the long term. Is the short term softening that we're seeing a blip on the radar because immigration is going to continue to fuel this? Is it stabilizing? What's your take on the short run sort of position of the market right now in terms of rental rates?
Yeah, I think that, there's been unemployment's ticking up a little bit. If immigration is softening or if people are not coming here in as large numbers anymore, that's obviously going to release some pressure on the rental market. It's definitely going to change landlord sentiment as well. There's so many small landlords that just kind of look at a few news articles and try to do their due diligence, but they just don't have the data, right? It's really tough to get that information. With what we're seeing right now, it's just like the temperature is just changing, if you will, and it's very off season, which is very odd. Like this is supposed to be peak, and this is the last time of the year I'd expect it to be drooping already. And whether it is a factor of, if I were to say any one thing, if we're trying to pick one thing, I think it is sellers who got a little bit in a pinch and they're trying to pick a slower burn than not. because we're having my conversations that we're having with potential clients are more awkward and more not good news, right?
Difficult conversations.
They're messing around. They're coming to us as like a last resort, which is fine. We need to provide that service and help them out, but we do advise them like sell it. Like, well, like this is the number, right?
It's interesting because if they do elect to sell, that'll continue to push inventory, especially going into the fall market, which we're expecting to see, somewhat of a surge, just typically in the fall market that we would normally get. So if it's compounded by these issues, we may see quite a bit more inventory is what it's sounding like, at least in the short run versus maybe the long term. When we consider the fact that Canada has brought in call it the last 5 years, over a couple million people. And the take on that is, we're going to see some levels of restriction on immigration take place, I think, in the coming years. What's your long-term take on rental rates? Are they going to continue to inch up here over time, or are we going to see them sort of plateau for the next little while?
Well, I mean, yeah, rental's very sticky on the simple math of how many households and how many houses. Like it's that simple. So this is not a immigration comment, but if you guys want to not build and you want rents to come down, people need to go. Like, and it doesn't need to be immigrants. It could be you and me, Ryan. Let's get out of here, right? Free up some space for other people. But that's how it breaks down. And either people are going to get so tired of trying to figure out how to, live here and like have a good life, and then they're just going to leave, which will free up some space. Condo development is kind of dropping off a cliff, and we're getting more into purpose-built rental, which I feel is a much better way to manage a housing market with more purpose-built rental. While everything I've heard about purpose-built rental is like, great, there's way more of it. It's like, well, anything is way more than zero, which is what we've been building for decades. And the ratio of condos to purpose-built rental has significantly changed, but like the total amount of building is not where it needs to be. And there's been I've asked a couple economists about this, is how do you measure negative vacancy? You can't. There's nobody's tried to do this. And when you've been at 0.8 or 0.9 for years, you end up in this position where the reporting is such that you can't really report zero. I know Squamish has done a couple bagels for vacancy the last couple of reports. Squamish is a small market. The main reporting from CMHC for Greater Vancouver is on purpose-built rental buildings, and those buildings can't be operated at like less than 0.5%, and that is a smoking hot rental market. You just can't do it. And so my argument has always been we are in a negative vacancy environment where we don't know how much excess supply is going to relieve like this problem. Like how many people are hanging out living with too many people and just want to get out by themselves and could if they could just had, $500 less in rent to pay, right? And then you have people that actually want to upgrade and afford it, right? Like me and my wife figured we'd be living in a nicer place by this time too, but this doesn't make any sense. There's no value here. Like let's just do something else with our money, right? Yeah.
Or if you're dealing with mortgage rates that don't make any sense too, on the purchase side, that is. Yes. And maybe that's an interesting sort of segue because mortgage rates have drastically impacted the marketplace over the last couple of years, both in the rental market as a result of passing on cost and also to mortgage originations and things like that, and moving the market forward. And this is probably a kind of a good segue to. This seems like a good segue to get into the recent story here that we started with off the top, whereby the RTB recently approved a 23.5% rental increase over 2 years on a property here for a landlord in Vancouver. And I know you've been tracking this on your Twitter. In fact, I think it's been seen more than 325,000 times in the last 2 days, which is huge. And so I'm wondering if, first of all, you can give us a little premise to this story, and then maybe follow up with how it's going and sort of the impact of your tweet and what you're seeing as a result of that.
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of days. We had a colleague in the Valley find somebody post photos of a decision on a Facebook group. and he tweeted it, and I called him. I was like, what? This can't be real. And there was only a couple partial paragraphs of it. So we didn't have all the details. Okay, it might not even be real and whatever. I did an Instagram story about it and a Twitter post, and it kind of did okay. But it's like when there's less information, we can't validate it. It's like, who cares? And it just kind of went away. My social media guy reposted it the other day on Instagram, reboosted it, and that got the eye of a Kamloops managing broker, and they gave me a call. They said, "Hey, do you have this decision? I want to can I look this up?" And I said, I haven't found it, but it's a good time to look it up. 2 months have passed. So I go on the RTU website and I'm searching for sentences in the photos that I saw and try to dig it up. And it pops up and I'm flabbergasted that it's even real. And I was like, well, great. So I save the link, download everything so they can't take it away because it's such a disaster. And then I read through this, and the actual decision is much worse than just the photos that I initially saw. So it's a 2021 first time, 2021 purchase, first time landlord. They're buying a fourplex. They got all-time low mortgage rates, variable rate, variable payment, and now their mortgage rate is 6.75 or something. And they're like, oh, our interest has jumped $80,000 or something on this property. And so they've gone ahead and filed for an ARI, which is an additional rent increase application, for landlord expenses. And me and colleagues have talked about this, kind of waiting for something like this to happen, at least an application, which you're never going to see. We don't see applications that are tossed out. And I cannot believe that they gave it. And ended at 23.5% increase, and that didn't even include the 3.5% that you're allowed to do it. So it's more like a 27% increase that's permitted. Whoa. And so this ARI is reserved for when you if you and me, Ryan, went out and bought a building, an old thing in the West End or something, and we're like, okay, we're going to buy this building, got a 30-year time horizon, let's replace the roof, replace the windows, replace the pipes, right? We would go to the RTB and say, hey, we just spent $500,000 updating this building. All these improvements are amortized over a 25 or 30-year lifespan. And then you take that whole cost, you break it into how many years, then how many months, then how many units, and then you apply to get those increases. And really on a $500,000 job for a 50-unit building, I'm not actually running the math here, but it works out $25 a month or something, or $30 a month per tenant, which people can easily digest if they're not living in a building needs repipe and a new elevator and all this kind of stuff, right? That's what it's for. To give this at the RTB level is nuts, because nobody ever asks a landlord to take out a mortgage. That's their own problem, unfortunately. That's my position. And now that I feel I'm not a journalist, but I broke the story. Technically, I dug this up and threw it out on Twitter, and it's gotten through to a couple of media outlets, and Ravi's office has come out and said, hey, this is not how this is supposed to go. We're going to review this policy and take it away or whatever they're going to do. Because it was, I imagine that whichever arbitrator did this did not check with their manager or director before sending this policy out, because it's horribly politically unpopular from everybody.
Wow. That's incredible. And the whole purpose around this rental increase was the fact, or at least they claimed, that their mortgage had increased so much, which we've heard so many different landlords not being able to match rent with their cost now. And here we are where that's breaking. And it's also, now it's a ruling, and that's a precedent. So that's where this gets really interesting, because this is now going to be used, I would imagine, in other instances. I can't see.
They're definitely going to try. They're definitely going to try, right?
Wow.
And it just doesn't it doesn't make sense that the tenants in this particular situation have to deal with that. Well, I may not agree with how the Bank of Canada is doing their interest rate policy, and I may not agree with how the province is doing their housing policy. I may not agree with how the city of Vancouver is doing their, rezoning and all that kind of stuff, or the bank that gave them this loan. Right? These are all individual organizations that should be accountable for this kind of end result. And if the housing market wasn't such a disaster, this thing can't happen. This isn't possible. Right? So that's the whole problem. But these four tenants definitely should not have to be like, it was like $150 a month increase now, right?
Yeah,
Nuts.
which a lot of tenants cannot afford,
No,
or they're adding
no.
people to the adding people to their living arrangements, right? Just to make that payment, or they're going to have
Mm-hmm.
to leave, but then they're going to have to pay a penalty. And it's just like they
Yeah,
get
it's an awful
trapped in that
decision. Yeah,
respect, right?
yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I kind of get a sense of where you might answer this next question, but I'm just going to ask it anyhow. We've seen this is kind of one disaster following a potential another disaster, but we had the province come out and change the notice period for tenants here. It was originally 4 months notice that you had to give in order to have them leave if say you sold your property, but then that didn't work because banks can't finance that. They'll only issue you an interest rate to purchase something for 3 months, so you can't buy a property, reserve a rate for 3 months, and then not exercise it because the rate wouldn't go through. So they amended that policy and brought it down to 3 months. What's your take on all of these changes? Because it sounds like to me that the government isn't doing much in terms of consulting with industry to make good decisions from the get-go. Is that the same sentiment that you're seeing on the rental side? Because that's what we're feeling on the sales side.
Mm-hmm. Well, personally, I'm very split because on one side, a lot of these rules and changes that they've done don't make a lot of sense. There is always a reason for them to do them, but it's not very well thought out for the whole mechanics of the industry. On the other side, it gives me a significant marketing advantage because every time somebody changes something, everybody wants to know and everything gets more complicated. And now I got to go run around and talk to everybody about it. So I'm enjoying it, but it's also crap. But yes, I digress. It was very obvious on this one where they went out with the 4 month thing, which they already released policy about that or legislation about that in advance in April or March, I believe, and it was well known that it's coming. When is it going to be coming? The summer. So there was no dates or anything announced. They gave everybody 2 weeks notice. I got an invite via email directly from the RTB on like the 15th of July, and they were releasing the portal on the 18th of July for a feedback session where they're going to walk me through like a sandbox of the portal. We didn't actually do the walkthrough until after the 18th, and I'd already done my own walkthrough with another colleague on a Zoom call. And the feedback was like, well, I mean, you already have a portal here. Like, this is all fine. Some of the wording was a little bit wonky. So, like, we're giving, like, proper user interface, like UI feedback, which, like, happy to do. But the main questions were, why do you need the date of birth of the buyer in this notice? Like, you have to put it into the portal. Why do you need the number of people that are living in the property and moving out and then that are going to be moving into the property? Are you collecting like data like a census, or are you trying to make more data points to catch somebody in a lie if this goes to a hearing? Like, are you using the date of birth and the name to try to send some stuff to the CRA? Like, just tell people what it's for, because so many people that are going to go through this process they're just trying to be honest and just do the right thing. Like, we talked to many realtors who sell tenanted property. The buyer, the seller, and the tenant, they're all fine. They're all good. It's not a problem. They're just going through the process, but they're all like, what the hell do we do? Why do we do this? Like, what are we, like, it's just confusing. And there's no explanation. Just like put it in a different area, being like, we're collecting this data to help with housing policy, or say it. But they don't say anything. And I asked the person directly, they had a UI person, and they had some manager of housing, just like no video, no name, just like, manager housing or whatever. And I asked the question, I said, why is this here? And they said, we will take that back for feedback. And then they got back to us, and all they said was, oh, we're just collecting data. Okay, well, put it in the portal. And data for what? Right? Like, you can't just, I get you're the government, but this doesn't make any sense. So, and then they went back for the 3 month thing after the real estate, everybody freaked out because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And now you got 3 months if you're a buyer, and the tenants have 21 days to dispute. And then if you own the property, it's 4 months and they have 30 days to dispute. when I started calling the managing brokers that we work with to help educate their realtors, some of the calls were hilarious because I called them and they're like, "Hey, what's going on? I'm really busy." It's like, "Hey, they just changed it. They just changed what? What are you talking about? It's 3 months now." No, it's not. And they're flab like they're like, "Are you kidding me?" I was like, "Hey," and it's 21 days, and they're like, "Hang on, what?" And you can hear them like moving paper, like, "What are you talking about?" And then I said it's also pi months, so 3.141592654 pi months in compensation back to the tenant, and they're like, and they all like I almost had a couple of them where like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "It's okay, that's where it stops," but it's that ridiculous, right? So don't know. I don't know what they're thinking back there.
Well, you're in an interesting spot because you're dealing with. I mean, you have to deal with both sides. You have to deal with the tenant side, and you have to deal with the landlord side. And so I'm interested. I know you're very split on this, but do you think any of the recent changes have helped the rental market at all, or do you think it's just complicated everything?
So the notice period, I get it gives people a longer period of time to find a home. Great. The problem with this is that it's like a longer period of time just to have a longer period of time. So people are like, "Oh, well, 2 months isn't long enough to find a place to live." It's like, well, a realtor doesn't just show up and say, "Oh, the house is sold." Like it doesn't just sell because the realtor shows up, right?
That's right.
And even if it did, if the realtor showed up in the middle of the month, it's still 2 weeks and then 2 full months, right?
Correct.
The sales process can take months, and then 2 month notice goes out. So
Correct.
any tenant who's saying, "Hey, I needed more time, 2 months isn't long enough," well, you had 6. You kind of knew what was going on here. Look around. However, there's a large group of the population who can't find something that they can afford, which it totally makes sense. And enough time is not, there is no amount of time. Like, do we need to help them start a business and get that running so they make more money so that they can then go afford? Like, it's not going to work. And so it's more about trying to identify who actually needs help rather than spreading these blanket policies over everybody. They wanted to kind of stop bad actors from giving a bad faith eviction, and it's like, well, you didn't change the penalties. You made a notice that they have to fill it out on the portal, but then you also put the template online and the notice just prints itself out. So I could go on there and very easily modify the notice and give it to somebody, make it look real, and they're just going to move out and not dispute it. Like, this is not going to stop anybody from, like, think like a thief for a second. It's very simple. It just complicates the process for everybody else.
Human beings respond to incentive.
Yes.
That is very, very well known. And okay, wow. So, in your opinion, then, yes, no. I'm sorry, I have to.
No,
plug.
no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
It didn't help.
It would with the amount. It's like they've got a bunch of monkeys on typewriters. It's just not calling people monkeys. It's just the thing where you got a bunch of monkeys on typewriters to try to hopefully write enough stuff that something works.
Right.
We just need to build some more properties and just incentivize it that way. I know JT got hucked through the mud about saying that senior citizens have too much home. It's like, well, they're allowed to. It's Canada. Like, let them live in their place. They paid it off. They can do whatever they want. But you have to incentivize them to leave. Give them a payday. Give them a thing that will have them move. Have them be happy about it. And they're unable to do that too. So we're just going to not have any more homes, is what they're saying. But they're going to complicate everything to distract us in the meantime. That's all I've really seen. And as time continues to pass, they continue to do that. So
all right, let's get fair enough. And I agree with you. I think it's complicated, the matter. I think people don't know which way is up right now. And I largely think you're going to see people, investors that we need to provide rental housing and rental stock are going to go to other places where it's just not as complicated, where it is more straightforward, where they don't have to deal with more time, which isn't going to really change the dynamic. Like you mentioned, it's not like if the person that is leaving cannot afford another place, no amount of time is going to fix that. Right. It's very, 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 very poignant remark. So let's get a little tactical here. Seeing as we are seeing some softening in the rental market here in terms of rates, and you have somebody who can make a lateral move, maybe save $200 or $300 a month on their rent, what from a tenant perspective, what can they do to maybe get out of an expensive rental and into something more affordable? Do they have anything, or do they need to see out the balance of their fixed term contract before they can move out?
Yeah, so if you're looking around and you're finding like, hey, I could do a little bit of an upgrade for, about what I'm paying, or I could change area, get closer to my work, or just a cool area you want to live in or something,
Mm-hmm.
and you're in a lease you signed 8 months ago or whatever, and you don't want to break it. Um, BC's made it very easy for tenants to just break their lease and leave. Um, the problem is that, and a lot of landlords don't know this, a lot of tenants don't know this. So if a tenant wants to leave, they can just give notice whenever and just leave. They have the financial obligation to continue to carry on that lease until another tenant has been rented to. They're also on the hook for the cost that the landlord takes on for turning that unit over. So while some people are like, oh, what, you just put it online and rent it? It's like, yeah, you've never rented a place before. Nobody wants to do that stuff. You spend a lot of money and time doing that. And so if your lease has a liquidated damages clause in it, and if it's properly written, it will kind of lay out the amount of money that is kind of like triggered that you're going to owe on top of the rent every month until the landlord has re-rented the property. So a reasonable liquidated damages clause is like 1 month's rent up to $2,500. You don't want to exceed that. We've looked at a bunch of RTB hearings and stuff, and that's kind of a best practice. The wording is very important, though, so go get legal advice on that if you're a landlord. You want to look at the liquidated damages clause, so let's say that $2,500 amount plus the rent as until it's rented. The landlord has the obligation to offset their potential and like obvious like the potential upcoming losses. So if they're like, oh, this tenant isn't going to pay the rent, I can't just sit back for until this lease expires and then re-rent it.
Right.
The landlord has to take reasonable action and start to re-rent the property at the same time. So there's probably 2 to 3% of our tenants break their lease early. We often just negotiate a way out of there. The tenant is allowed to bring the landlord a qualified applicant. The landlord can still fully screen them the same way they screen the initial tenant. And with reasonable people, you're just going to figure it out that way. The tenant could go and offer the landlord, hey, I just want to pay 2 months rent and get out of this thing because I want to move now. And that just kind of, you just pick a date where you're done, you're out. The landlord has to deal with the property now. That has to be mutually agreed. I would never encourage anyone to just leave, but you can definitely, you're not like in a lease permanently. Like nobody can make you stay there. It's not prison. It's just you have financial obligations, right?
Well, that covers a lot of what I wanted to talk about today. I guess the last thing I'll leave you with, and maybe just leave me with your thoughts, and then we'll leave it there. But I feel like in the last couple of years, especially through social media and through a lot of these policy changes, it's been very much, or it's turned what has historically been a symbiotic relationship, tenant and landlord, into a very much a us versus them sort of scenario. And I think it's important that we remind people that in order for rental properties to exist, we need the landlords as well. It's not just a problem that the government can fix. And as we go through these stories where we're hearing, rent increasing by 24%, or in your words, maybe even as high as 27%, we're hearing all of the bad stories. But that's not generally the case, is it? Is most of the time do tenants and landlords actually get along, or is it actually as fiery as some of the stories we've been talking about today?
No, it's very very boring, honestly. A story about a good tenancy is quite possibly the most boring story anybody could tell. But when you villainize one, side, like investors and landlords and things, and you have people that are like legitimately struggling, and it's not just a standard part of the population. It's like, hey, it's really tough to afford housing in Vancouver. Like, people give us shit all the time, and it's like, you do realize like all of our staff lives here. They rent, and
Yeah.
like it's we see it too. The the hatred from both sides is very much on the ends of the bell curve in my view. It's the people who say landlords are evil scum and they're not useful, and then I say, okay, well, where's your down payment? Right? Like, this is a tool to allow you to get in and have yourself be independent. Go have your job, go live your life, have your private accommodation, save some money, and go buy a house if that's what you want to do. There's also tons of tenants who make a shit ton of money and they live in rent controlled apartments because why not? Rent control. Why wouldn't you get a better deal on your place? So let's villainize those people. Well, that sounds ridiculous. Well, they're contributing to the problem as well. Are there bad actor landlords? Yes. Are there bad actor restaurant owners? Yes. Like, they exist. We're all human. But the vast majority of the time, we're dealing with very reasonable people who try not to get in over their head in debt and payments and all these kind of things. We've had plenty of landlords sell their properties just because as the portfolio grows, it's just a standard thing. And a lot of them, their biggest concern is like, how are the tenants? How are they going to deal with this? And we have to remind them, it's like, we're giving them the notice. We're talking to them in advance. They rented this property at a conservative rent to income ratio. We're going to give them some resources. Like, you've had a good home for them and they know their rights because we've told them and we've referred them to them. And these people are not stupid. And most of those tenants, when they get the notice about the owner's going to sell or move back in, there's like, okay, thanks so much. And you know what? They end up giving us notice. Like, we'll give them notice. Like, hey, no, you know what? We found our own place. It's all good. And it's like, cool. And then you go back to like Twitter and you're like, oh my God, what's going on here? I feel like some of these people have never met a tenant or a landlord. It's like you just live in a basement somewhere and, I don't know. So,
yeah, we're definitely in the era of the politicization of housing. And I think the strange sort of perception that social media is actually real life when it's not. It's nowhere near it. So anyhow, with that being said, Keaton, thank you so much for being on today. If clients, whether they're tenants or landlords, would like to reach you for help, how is it best for them to reach you?
We got our website, GVANTPM.com. We're trending very high if you just search property management in whatever city you're in the Lower Mainland. So property management Vancouver, property management BC, or you can text the word homeowner to 604-256-6930.
What about your Twitter if they want to see this crazy story? Just going
Definitely
back to
on Twitter, yeah. K Bessy on Twitter. Just type in Keaton Bessy Twitter. It'll be there for sure.
Awesome. Right on, Keaton. Thanks so much. And hopefully we don't wait another 8 months and you've got less hair then. Ideally,
it's not coming back. It's not coming back.
Well, hopefully both the rental market and the sales market do come back. And until then, we'll have you on again in about 6 months. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ryan.